Hey everybody, welcome back. Another video for you. Really appreciate those of you supporting me over on Patreon, patreon.com/Eric Draitser. That's where you can go to get exclusive access to all of the videos, the audio commentaries, the podcasts, the interviews, poetry writing, so much more over there. Really appreciate those of you already doing that and those of you considering doing that. Of course, Counterpunch Radio is the podcast. Counterpunch Plus is a subscriber section. That's where you get access to all of the great features that Counterpunch offers every single day. The columns, the guest contributors, everything. Counterpunch is my favorite. I'm so proud to be part of the project and the team over there. And I would highly urge everybody to go over and do the subscription and do what you need to do to support Counterpunch. So today I'm going to do a hopefully very quick little commentary here, as it is 6:30 in the morning as I record, and my kids aren't awake yet, so we'll see how that goes. Anyway, I want to talk about the news just from the other day that the United States is going to be sending these cluster munitions to Ukraine. Of course, this is now another controversy here on the left. Those of us who have been opposing Russia's criminal invasion in Ukraine and have been supporting Ukraine's right to resist that invasion and its right to self-determination, we find ourselves once again engaged in a discourse with those who, discourse is a nice way to say it, arguing and bickering and fighting with those who have either overtly or tacitly been supporting Russia's criminal adventure in Ukraine. And there are many on the left who have been doing that for various reasons and in various ways, as we know, as I've outlined and detailed in videos prior to this one. I'm not going to go into all of the different assholes and all of their stupid arguments, right? So for now, what I would like to just focus on is what is the appropriate response to the United States decision to send these cluster munitions, and how do we talk about this on the left among those of us that are genuinely anti-war, genuinely anti-imperialist, and have a genuine concern for human beings, right? Not those people who are posturing around these ideas and posturing as anti-imperialists, fake anti-imperialists, as I've been calling them, because of course Russia's invasion is imperialist aggression. But I don't want to digress into that discussion for now. Let's focus on the issue at hand, the issue of these cluster munitions. So what is the position of those of us who are either engaged with Ukrainian solidarity work or who for various reasons have taken the correct stand in this conflict? Well, I think it's very clear. I think it's very obvious. And I think this is, again, a question of moral certainty and moral high ground. The bottom line here is nobody on the left, in my view, and of course I'm speaking from my view, nobody on the left who is in support of Ukraine should be supporting cluster munitions being sent there. And there are many reasons why. Okay, the first most obvious reason is because it cedes the moral high ground. Ukraine, part of the issue with Ukraine, and this is again where these sort of fake anti-imperialists who have been supporting Putin and supporting Russia in various ways, this is where they completely lose the plot. Okay, the moral high ground is clearly and has always been on the side of Ukraine, on the side of the invaded country, on the side of the country that is fighting a war of national survival. This is clear, this is obvious, and it doesn't matter how much people try to muddy the waters in order to please Daddy Putin or whatever. The bottom line is that Ukraine, in defense of Ukraine, is a moral position. And this has been true from the very beginning of this war. Now, as we talk about something like cluster munitions, you also have to talk about the collateral damage done to that moral high ground, that ethical and moral clarity that comes with Ukraine's righteous sort of resistance against this invasion. You see that high ground when you start using weapons like cluster munitions, which, as we know and has been reported many times, including by pro-Russia voices, that cluster munitions are have been widely made illegal in many countries. They have a tendency to have a high dud rate of something like 40% of the munitions do not explode upon impact, which means, of course, they sit on the ground waiting for a small child to come along and play with it years out, months later, years later, and boom. Right. Of course, we know this story with landmines and other unexploded ordnance from Vietnam, from many other conflicts. So this is not some revelation. This is not some, grand realization that people, are just coming to. This is something we've known for decades. Okay, so let's not pretend, for the sake of our, desire to see Ukraine fight off its invaders, let's not pretend that issue simply goes away. It doesn't. Okay, so this is part of where the opposition to these kinds of munitions has to come from. Now, I've said all along, and I'm just going to digress for 2 seconds. I've said all along that it is not really the place of the left to be engaging in questions of weaponry and arming of Ukraine in general. You can simply make no comment about it. You can simply say that this is, this is part of the war. You can say this is what Ukraine must do, what the Ukrainian government must do. You could say nothing at all. You could take whatever position you would like to on that. It's really not of central importance how you frame the issue of weapons. What's of central importance is how you understand the conflict and what is the responsibility of the left in relation to the conflict. See, these many people who have in various ways been overtly or tacitly pro-Putin all along are going to try to muddy the waters here, and they're going to try to say, but you see, you are supporting escalations, you are support. No, we went through all this bullshit with the HIMARS. We went through all this bullshit multiple times already. The left is not supposed to be engaging in what kinds of weapons should or shouldn't be going. That is not our responsibility. We have no impact on that. We have no influence on that. What we do have influence on is by framing the conflict, framing the war in the proper terms, not allowing reality be turned upside down, where the victim is the aggressor and the aggressor is the victim. This is part of the whole psychological game that the Kremlin's little foot soldiers online have been doing all along, right? Keep it clear, keep it straight. Who is the victim? Who is the aggressor? So now when you enter these cluster munitions and you again begin to muddy those waters, I think that's important. Now, I'm not a military expert, so I'm not going to get into all the different ways that these weapons might be used or where there might be battlefield advantages. Sure, of course, I read the news reports just like everybody else. I know that military people say that this is specifically used for dug-in soldiers and trenches and so forth. I get all of that. But again, as I said, I'm not really interested on the military side of this. I'm sure military people on YouTube and elsewhere can fight out those arguments. I'm again focused on the political side of this, the propaganda side of this, and quite frankly, the way in which it tends to transform people on both sides of this argument. So I would caution anybody who has been defending Ukraine, who's part of Ukrainian solidarity movement or anything like that, to be very careful about trying to twist yourself into the kind of mental pretzels you need to justify this sort of arming of Ukraine, because it's somewhat embarrassing, and it puts you in a position much like those leftists who have twisted themselves into pretzels trying to justify the unjustifiable war in the first place. Okay, so I think, again, it has to be understood in these terms. We are dealing in a political conflict here, one in which moral certitude and ethical clarity, these things matter. They matter actually a great deal. Cluster munitions belong in the same category as the white phosphorus that Israel rains down on Palestine all the time, every time that they start their bombings. It belongs in the same category as the use of depleted uranium in Iraq, all of the horrible things done to places like Fallujah and many other places around the world where the U.S. has criminally destroyed countries, cities, towns, villages, what have you. Okay, they belong in that category. These kinds of weapons that do untold damage, that are indiscriminate in many ways. These are, not only is it the dud rate and what happens to these munitions after the fact, it is also the fact that they're just simply dropped on some area, come what may, whoever may be on the ground right there at that time. Those poor souls who are at the ground level when these things hit. Okay, so the idea that we on the left should somehow be justifying this is nonsense. This must be rejected. This is something that will be used by Putin's sort of online sycophants in order to bash you over the head. But you see, now you support criminal weaponry coming from the United States, the most criminal state on the planet, etc. And that actually is a relevant point that does need to be addressed and does need to be brought out over and over and over again. No matter what we want to say about Russia, about Russia's criminal activity in Ukraine and actually around the world, it remains the United States that is also the world's dominant criminal state that provides these kinds of weapons, that does this kind of damage all over the world every single day. This we know about the United States because we've spent our whole lives opposing all of these things. So we're not going to turn around and begin supporting similar types of actions, even if it's in a justified war of national defense, of self-determination, and so forth. I think this is really important. I don't think that we can budge on this issue. And again, I speak from the perspective of the left. I don't speak for the Ukrainian government. I don't speak for NATO's people. I don't speak for the Ukrainian supporters online who are liberals and conservatives and every other part of the political spectrum. I don't speak to those people. Those people aren't watching me, and I'm not paying attention to them really. I'm focusing and speaking to and listening to the left, and I think the left needs to be very clear on this issue. The other thing that I want to point out too is that as this whole question has evolved, it raises the other question of the role of the United States in this war, because from the very beginning there have been arguments about just how involved is the United States, how far is the United States willing to go in its support for Ukraine, and this has been this issue has been used and abused by many people for various reasons, most of which is agenda driven. But like those people, like I've been calling Putin sycophants, or, fake anti-imperialists, hi Kitty, fake anti-imperialists or whatever, they have been from the very beginning making these kinds of arguments. You see, the U.S. is escalating. The U.S. is escalating. The U.S. is fomenting this war. The U.S. has created a proxy war. The U.S. is doing this. The U.S. is supplying. We went through this bullshit time and time again. We went through this with the HIMARS. We went through this with drone technology. We went through this with military advisors. We went through this over and over and over again, countless times before. This is the nature of this war. Okay. This is the fact of the matter is the United States has provided very, very little to the Ukrainians. There's so much that the U.S. has in terms of weapons of death. The U.S. is the leading arms dealer in the world. The U.S. military-industrial complex is a behemoth compared to even the Russian military-industrial complex, which is massive in comparison to others around the world. So the United States is without competition in that category. So, again, I think that we have to be very clear about the fact that the U.S. is basically, and I mean, I don't. There are ways, there are grays. What am I trying to say? Shades of gray here. There are different ways of looking at it, but at a very basic level, the United States has provided a minimal amount of weapons to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians, if you were to corner them privately, I guarantee you get them to admit the fact that the U.S. has basically been stringing them along. Right. First, it was with the HIMARS, and then it was with other weapons technology. Right. But the idea being that, you can have them, but you can only have a couple of them, or, you can have them, but it'll be disabled, so you can't shoot it more than 5 kilometers or 8 kilometers or whatever. Now, obviously, we know that this is because of the U.S. and the Pentagon's fear that the Ukrainians might use those weapons to, attack Russia directly or widen the war or what have you. That's what they say. Now, there are different ways of looking at it. You can make the argument that the United States has wanted to kind of slowly try to bleed the Russians and just give just enough to keep this conflict going so that the Russians remain weakened. Or another way of looking at that, I think equally valid, is that the United States was giving just enough for the Ukrainians to not be steamrolled, but not enough for the Ukrainians to be able to actually widen the war or use sort of aggressive offensive tactics in order to truly liberate all of Ukraine, and also potentially to bring the war to Russia. So the United States has played this role where, yes, it's providing weapons, but it's providing just the bare minimum. And I think that the cluster munitions issue is, again, kind of another example of this, but also one that is deeply immoral and unethical. And that's part of the issue here. That, look, the bottom line is, and as I've already said, I'm not a military expert, and I will readily admit that. However, my very basic knowledge tells me these weapons, while they do have some effect in terms of dug-in troops and so forth, they are not going to fundamentally change this war. They are not some game changer for the Ukrainian armed forces to somehow magically sweep away the Russians and so forth. No, that's not the case. So for a weapon system that will have what I would describe as a minimal advantage, a marginal advantage maybe, the flip side of it, the cost of it, both in terms of the physical cost on the ground, but also in propaganda, also in just the moral and ethical clarity, that's something that is deeply troubling. And I think that people, again, if you're a voice for for solidarity with Ukraine's resistance, rightful resistance against this invasion, then you have to really look in the mirror and ask yourself if this is really what we're supposed to be doing. Are you really comfortable trying to make an argument in favor of this, knowing how many innocent people are going to die and be injured and disfigured and whatever from these munitions? We've seen this. We've seen it in Iraq. We've seen it in Libya. We've seen it in many other places. Do you really want to make these arguments? Are you sure about that? Ask yourself that, really. When you're done watching this video, sit for just a moment, 30 seconds even, and try to ask yourself this question. Am I somebody who would be supporting these weapons in other situations? Would you? I don't think so. If you're watching me, I bet the answer to that question is no. I think that we need to be clear in our opposition to this. I think we need to be clear in saying, yes, we support Ukraine. Yes, every bit of this war is the responsibility of the Russians in terms of the invasion, in terms of all of the crimes that have come from that. Obviously, there's politics. Obviously, there's international issues and so forth. But the war is what it is. The Russians are criminals in terms of having invaded. And I think we need to be clear about that. We also need to be clear about what our politics are, what our moral compass is, and what direction it points. This isn't some trivial question. This is actually at the center of all of this. The resistance to Russia's invasion is an ethical and a moral question. It is one of political responsibility, and I think that in looking at these kinds of weapons, that is as well. There's many more things that I could add to that, but I think I'm going to leave it there just for now. Go over to the YouTube, subscribe on YouTube, just look up my name, find it there. Go over to Patreon, patreon.com/Eric Draitser. There's a lot more to discuss. If people want, I can talk more about these munitions, but I think that I've said what needs to be said. The bottom line is support Ukraine. Don't support the United States sending these kinds of weapons. Don't support the United States, period. The United States is a criminal enterprise in every possible way in terms of how it conducts itself internationally. The United States is not to be supported. Supporting Ukraine does not mean going against your own morals and ethics. Thanks for listening. Talk to you again next time.